Have you ever been judged just because of the way you speak, not because of what you said, not because of your attitude, but simply because your voice didn't sound like the majority? A black woman walked into the airport in a simple suit, pulling behind her a black suitcase with frayed edges. She smiled, handed over her documents, and greeted with a simple sentence. "Good morning, I have a flight to Atlanta." Her voice had a hint of African accent, warm and gentle. But the moment she finished speaking, the check-in agent let out a dismissive laugh. He turned to his colleague and whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "She should learn to speak English properly." The room went quiet for a brief second. No one spoke up. No one reacted. The woman simply looked at him with calm eyes, no anger, no surprise. Perhaps because she was far too used to it. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a manager. She didn't demand an apology. Instead, she simply said softly, "Thank you for showing me exactly what I needed to see today." And then she pulled her suitcase and walked away, showing no sign of anger. But just a few hours later, that entire airport and all of its connected partners began to feel the real consequences. Because that woman was no ordinary traveler. She was the founder and CEO of a $950 million travel conglomerate. And overnight, her company fully withdrew from that airport system. Thousands of flights were canceled, contracts collapsed, stock prices dropped. All of it because of what seemed like a harmless joke about her accent. But this is not just a story about power, not just a quiet retaliation from a successful businesswoman. This is a reminder of the biases we sometimes unconsciously carry and the price that disrespect can bring. Right now, you and I are about to take a deeper journey about that woman, about accent bias, about how real power doesn't need to shout to be heard, and about why from this moment on you'll never again judge someone based on how they pronounce a word. Let's begin. There are moments that last just a few minutes, but echo for a lifetime. And there are words that seem casual, but make entire systems pay the price. That flight was scheduled to depart from a major U.S. airport. The check-in line crawled forward with the usual weariness. Amid the sounds of rolling luggage and boarding announcements came a black woman approaching the counter. Her outfit was plain. Flat shoes, her hair neatly tied. In her hand were some documents, and she offered a polite smile as she spoke. "Good morning, I have a flight to Atlanta." That was all. But within seconds, the agent, a white man, looked up with an annoyed expression. He rolled his eyes and said loud enough for the next person to hear, "Wow, someone needs English lessons." Not because she was incorrect, not because she was rude, but simply because her accent, a bit nasal, slightly African, didn't match the standard American he was used to. She didn't respond. She didn't walk away. She just stood there looking at him for a long moment. Her eyes didn't hold rage or hatred, only stillness and sadness. Then she said, "Thank you. That told me everything I needed to know today." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to quiet the space around the counter. No one said a word. The agent gave a nervous chuckle, and the woman walked away, pulling her worn suitcase as if nothing had happened. But in truth, everything had just begun. Accent bias. This is a particularly dangerous form of prejudice because it doesn't lie in words, but in the subconscious way people judge each other based on sound alone. Many Asian African and Latinx Americans share a similar experience, being mocked for their accent, criticized for not sounding right, deemed less intelligent, simply because they speak differently. A study at the University of Chicago once found that people who spoke English with a non-standard American accent were often considered less trustworthy, even when what they said was completely accurate. This isn't just bias. It's an invisible barrier that excludes millions from opportunity. We often think discrimination comes in big forms: skin color, gender, religion. But sometimes it starts with a syllable, a furrowed brow, a smirk of contempt. And perhaps that airport agent had no idea that the woman he just mocked was one of the most influential figures in global tourism. She didn't yell at him. She didn't ask for a manager. She didn't cause a scene. Instead, she did something entirely different, something that the airport would remember for many years to come. To many in the travel industry, that name is synonymous with resilience, innovation, and rewriting the rules. But to the airport employee that day, Amara was just a black woman with a funny accent. He couldn't have known and likely never imagined that he had just disrespected the CEO of a $950 million travel enterprise operating in over 30 countries and strategically partnered with some of the world's largest airports. Amara was never the kind of person who walked into a room expecting to be recognized. In fact, she often dressed so simply, she was easy to underestimate, but that's exactly how she lived quietly focused and letting results speak for themselves. Born in Ghana to a middle-class family, Amara was the fourth of six children. Her father was a geography teacher. Her mother sold vegetables in the local market. Nothing in her childhood suggested she would one day become a world-class business leader. But she had two things no one could take from her: an uncanny ability to observe people and a relentless desire to surpass every limit her circumstances had imposed. She learned English from old textbooks her father brought home from school. She pronounced every word the Ghanaian way and was often teased by her peers for not sounding Western like the people in movies. But instead of being ashamed, Amara started writing travel diaries, short stories about places she dreamed of visiting: London, Cape Town, Tokyo. At just 17, she earned a scholarship to study abroad in the UK. And from there began a journey that even she could never have foreseen. After college, Amara worked at a small travel agency in Manchester. There she made a crucial realization. Most high-end travel services were not designed for African or Asian clients, or if they were, the offerings were limited and laced with assumptions. Packages often presumed that people of color wanted the cheapest options and couldn't afford premium services. Support policies were often missing appropriate languages. Staff lacked intercultural communication training. So at 29, Amara founded Thompson Global Voyages, a travel company that began with just 3 employees and one dream: to provide exceptional travel experiences for those overlooked by the global tourism industry. She designed special packages for clients from communities of color, immigrants, and individuals with unique cultural needs. These weren't just flexible itineraries and thoughtful services. They came with something deeper: profound respect for cultural identity. In the first year, the company served 800 clients. By year 5, that number had surpassed 250,000, supported by a loyal customer base from the US, the UK, Nigeria, South Africa, and Brazil. Soon, airports, hotels, airlines began approaching her. Not just to partner, but to learn. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to change her accent. She just had to remain true to herself and let the results of perseverance echo louder than anything else. If they won't give you a seat at the table, she once said, build your own. And if you have to build the house around it, people may underestimate you because of your accent, your background, your demeanor. But your true value, when fueled by persistence, will outgrow any temporary prejudice. And on that day when Amara was mocked at the airport, she didn't respond with fury, because she knew what she had built was powerful enough that her absence would be noticed. When Amara walked out of that airport, no one around her realized. What had just happened wasn't merely a personal insult. It was a sharp sliver, a small cut of a much deeper problem: linguistic bias. We often talk about racial, gender, and age discrimination, but few recognize that accents, something we don't choose, can silently shape how we're treated. Someone who speaks slowly or with an unfamiliar rhythm is often assumed to be less intelligent, less professional, even less trustworthy. And this happens not only to immigrants or international students. Even Americans from different regions can fall victim to this kind of bias. At Stanford University, researchers conducted a study. 2 groups of students listened to the same lecture. One group was told the lecturer was a native-born American. The other was told the speaker was Asian. Though the voice was exactly the same, the second group rated the lecture as harder to understand and less engaging, just because they believed the speaker had a different background. Strange, isn't it? But in truth, the human brain tends to trust what's familiar. And in a world where standard American English is seen as the default correct form, anyone who sounds different is automatically placed in a competition. They never signed up for a contest to see who can blend in better. Amara knew this. She'd known it since she was a teenage girl in Ghana, teased for sounding different from her teachers on TV. She knew it when she first arrived in the UK and was asked by a bank interviewer to please repeat that in a more understandable accent. And she saw it over and over with her clients, her staff, and even with her daughter, who attended an international school. But instead of trying to fit in, Amara chose a different path. She turned her difference into her brand. Her company's promotional videos always featured narrators with local accents, from the Yoruba tones of Nigeria to Indian English to Caribbean cadences from Jamaica. She didn't do it for attention. She did it to send a message quality isn't found in pronunciation. Value doesn't lie in accent. It lies in how you live, how you serve, and how you connect. And maybe that's the lesson the airport agent and the system behind him needed to relearn. No one should be undervalued simply because they sound different from you. No one should feel they need to mimic a standard accent to be respected. And no one at an airport, in a school, or at work should hear laughter when they're doing their best to communicate with what they have. If Amara had walked into the airport that day, wearing a designer suit flanked by assistants carrying luxury bags and signaling for a first-class seat, perhaps the reaction would have been different. But she didn't. She walked alone, dressed plainly, with no visible markers of power. And perhaps that's exactly why the agent thought he could mock her without consequence. Because to him, she didn't look like someone in power. We live in a world where power is often misunderstood. It's tied to things you can see: luxury cars, executive titles, long resumes, or even social media follower counts. But real power, the kind that creates lasting change, sometimes walks in the quietest form. Amara understood that, and she never felt the need to prove anything. After walking away from the check-in counter, she sat quietly in a corner of the departure lounge. No anger, no panic. She simply pulled out her phone, made a brief call, and left a clear directive. Pause all cooperation with this airport. Begin executing an alternative plan. That was enough. Within hours, Thomson Global Voyages partners received official notices. All flights connected to that airport were suspended for at least 90 days. Hotel bookings, ground transportation, local tour guides, event tickets, everything was frozen. There was no outrage on social media, no press conferences, no public accusations. But behind the scenes, one link after another began to unravel. Revenue dropped, schedules turned chaotic, and soon stakeholders began asking, what's going on? In a global leadership seminar where Amara once spoke, she said something that left the audience in deep reflection. Real power is when you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. And that's exactly what she did. A few years earlier, an Asian American CEO attended a business meeting in New York dressed in simple athletic wear. As he entered the elevator at the company headquarters, a security guard stopped him and said delivery staff must use the back entrance. The man didn't argue. He smiled, pulled out his CEO ID card, and replied, "Thank you. I'll include this in the internal security evaluation report." No shouting, but within 72 hours, the entire security team was replaced. Because power doesn't always look like power. It's not in appearances or voices. It's in the ability to control one's response and choose action over argument. And ironically, because that airport agent couldn't see power, he was completely defeated by it. Amara's response wasn't loud. There were no angry status updates, no viral speeches, no dramatic confrontations like the ones people often see in trending videos. But it was that very silence that struck the hardest. Just hours after Amara left the airport, an emergency meeting was convened at Thomson Global Voyages headquarters in Atlanta. Under the warm golden lights of the boardroom, the executive team activated a pre-established protocol, an emergency response plan for incidents of discrimination. Amara didn't have to say much. She had designed the entire system years ago after a similar experience in Europe. The protocol included a very clear clause: if any partner exhibits discriminatory behavior, whether unconscious or intentional, cooperation may be suspended immediately without prior notice. Over 200 airline tickets were canceled. 14 premium tours priced between $6,000 and $18,000 per client were halted. Airport service providers from Brazil, South Africa, and Dubai were forced to rearrange itineraries without being able to publicly explain the reason: we are no longer working with Airport X. And what pushed the situation beyond control was something no one anticipated. A passenger who had been standing in line behind Amara that day, a middle-aged white man from Oregon, had casually recorded the interaction at the check-in counter. Initially, he only meant to capture a strange moment, but after replaying the clip several times back at his hotel, he felt something wasn't right. A few hours later, he posted the video to Twitter X with the caption, "Just witnessed a travel agent mock a black woman's accent at the airport. She didn't raise her voice. just said, "Thank you," and walked away. That moment stayed with me. No dramatic visuals, no music, just a 38-second clip and a quiet story. But by the next morning, the video had over 3 million views. And when some online users identified the woman in the video as Amara Thompson, the situation spun out of anyone's control. The media jumped in. Articles appeared with headlines such as, "CEO of 950 millionaire travel group walks out after being mocked at airport." Powerful clapback without a word. The story behind the viral video. What happens when we mistake grace for weakness? And the most remarkable part, Amara remained silent. No interviews, no official statements, no attempt to capitalize on the media. She simply continued working, but her composure only made the public pay more attention and forced those involved to ask themselves, are we really creating a respectful environment? Sometimes the strongest response is to not respond the way they expect. No shouting, no blame games, just walking away and leaving a void so large it cannot be ignored. And the void Amara left this time was a financial and reputational crater too big to cover. The internet has a strange power. It can forget the ordinary in an instant, but also turn a small act into a global spotlight overnight. And that's exactly what happened with the short video showing the moment Amara was mocked at the check-in counter. No effects, no edits, just the image of a woman standing still and an airport staff member making what he thought was a harmless joke. But the online world saw something deeper in that moment. Within just 24 hours of being posted, the video surpassed 3 million views. And it wasn't just online users who paid attention. Journalists, social justice advocates, and even people who had personally experienced accent discrimination began speaking up. One user on Twitter wrote, "I'm a Mexican immigrant. I've stayed silent many times just to avoid trouble because of my accent." Her thank you spoke for me. Another account shared, "This isn't just about accent bias. It's a reminder that silence, when backed by power, can stop the world in its tracks." Hashtags like Chari Respect Accents, Chari Amara Thompson, and Travel with Dignity began trending. Reaction videos, commentaries, and cultural analyses flooded TikTok and YouTube. A linguistics professor in New York even posted an educational video about accent bias, explaining why so many of us unconsciously judge people based on how they sound without realizing we're doing it. The power of the internet isn't just in its speed, it's in its ability to connect millions of people who once felt alone in their experience. Amara's story was no longer about one individual. It became a symbol for everyone who had ever been laughed at, silenced, or made to feel not enough just because they didn't sound like the majority. And that's when institutions, those who thought this will blow over, began realizing this wasn't just a ripple, it was an undercurrent rising. One fascinating detail: Amara still hadn't said a single word. No speech, no reaction video, no reposting the clip. She didn't join the media storm. But somehow everyone understood exactly what she was saying. And her silence put the other side in a difficult position. Because when public opinion is inflamed, people don't want excuses. They want accountability and concrete action, not another recycled PR statement. The power of the internet isn't to take someone down. It's to bring light to what has long been left in the dark. Amara's story went viral not because she was famous, but because she touched a collective wound that too many had been silently carrying. As the media storm grew, the first thing most companies do is meet. At the airport where the incident occurred, executives called an emergency meeting. And it didn't start with the question, where did we go wrong? But rather, how do we control the damage? A public apology was drafted in haste. Every word was carefully chosen to admit just enough fault, but not jeopardize legal standing. By the next morning, a press release was published. "We apologize for the experienced passenger Amara Thompson encountered at our airport. We are reviewing our staff training policies to ensure all passengers are treated with respect and fairness." But as the apology circulated, the online community was not appeased. On the contrary, thousands of comments poured into the airport's official channels, revealing one clear sentiment: people didn't want apologies. They wanted responsibility. One person wrote, "This isn't an unexpected experience. This is discrimination." Another commented, "If the video hadn't gone viral, would you have apologized at all?" In today's world, an apology has become a form of PR strategy carefully crafted by communications teams, lawyers, and crisis managers. But the unfortunate truth is, an apology without change is just waiting for the storm to pass. And Amara, as always, remained silent. But when the press reached out her company, Thomson Global Voyages issued just one statement. We will reevaluate future partnerships based on tangible commitments, not just words. Not just words. Action. Within 72 hours, the company shifted all its tours to alternative destinations, airports, hotels, and services where staff were trained to handle multicultural clients with dignity. They launched an online platform to help travelers recognize and respond to unconscious bias during their journeys. And within a week, new clients who had never heard of Amara's company before began asking, why haven't I traveled with a company like this before? A few years ago, a major fashion brand released an ad featuring a young black boy wearing a hoodie with a controversial slogan. When backlash came, they apologized and blamed the image approval process. But people remembered not a single person in that entire team paused to ask, is this okay? An apology should not be a reaction to crisis. It must be a default attitude even when no one is watching. Sometimes an apology doesn't show remorse. It shows fear of reputation loss. To rebuild trust, a press release is not enough. It takes action and a shift in how we view humanity. If this story ended with Amara, perhaps it would remain just a viral video, a regrettable moment, a passing headline soon replaced by the next news cycle. But it didn't end with her, because Amara is not the only one who's ever been diminished for the way she speaks. She is just one among millions of people who every day must choose between keeping their linguistic identity or suppressing it to be treated more fairly. A Haitian girl in third grade in Florida once told her mother she didn't want to speak English at school anymore because her classmates laughed when she pronounced three as tree. A Nigerian Uber driver told a passenger he was from New York, though he had only recently immigrated, because a previous rider gave him 1 star and wrote, "I couldn't understand a word he said." An Indian professor at a top university in California received student complaints that his accent is hard to understand despite the fact that his lectures had been cited in dozens of international research papers. And if we look deeper, we find a sobering truth. The voice, a tool meant to connect, has for many become a wall that divides. Why? Because we've been unconsciously programmed to believe there is a right way to speak. And anyone who falls outside that standard must work harder, prove themselves more, and endure more scrutiny. Amara broke through that wall, but not everyone has the privileged strength or support that she did. Most people remain silent. Or worse, they change themselves so much to fit in that they lose the roots of their cultural identity. And here lies the hardest truth. If someone like Amara, a woman with status, influence, and credibility, can be publicly mocked for how she speaks, then what happens to those without power, without a platform, without a community to stand behind them? This isn't just a story about a black woman at an airport. This is about how even the smallest difference in accent, a word, a syllable, can still be gently punished every day through a look, a laugh, or a raised eyebrow. Respect doesn't begin with speeches or policies. It begins with conversation, with one person encountering another, and making a choice today. Will I choose to understand or to judge? But here's the good news. Change doesn't require a crowd. It can start with one person, someone like Amara. Someone who dares to walk away when belittled. Someone who dares to remain silent so that the voices of others can finally be heard. There are types of power that make people listen out of fear, and there are types of power that make people listen out of admiration. Amara belongs to the second kind. From the very start of her journey, she never tried to shout to be heard. She built something strong enough that even in silence, it demanded attention. It's easy to get angry when insulted. Easy to say, I want to speak to your manager. Easy to film post and demand justice in the loudest way possible. But Amara didn't do any of that. She understood that real power doesn't lie in grabbing the microphone. It lies in controlling the backstage. One phone call, one internal decision, one strategic move. And suddenly hundreds of eyes turned in her direction, not because she shouted, but because she acted, clearly, decisively, and without warning. A journalist once wrote of Amara, "She doesn't need to walk red carpets. Wherever she stands becomes the center of gravity. And that doesn't come from fame. It comes from something deeper inner strength, a power forged through years of being underestimated, of being patient, of choosing silence to prepare for a stronger response at the right moment." In 2018, a Chinese-American CEO in Silicon Valley was rejected from attending an investment conference because organizers thought he wasn't the primary decision maker. They asked him to send a more senior representative. He didn't argue. He didn't criticize. 3 months later, his company invested $200 million in a rival event, causing the original conference to lose its biggest sponsor. He wrote just one line on LinkedIn: "Sometimes real leaders don't wear name tags, because real power isn't something others grant you. It's something you build from within." And that kind of power, when used at the right time in the right way, can change prejudice, can transform systems, and even reshape the future of an entire industry. Amara never needed anyone to acknowledge her power. She only needed people to feel it through the results. And the most beautiful part, she didn't keep that power for herself. Her story, though she never officially told it, has opened a new path for those who once felt excluded from the game. People who were told you have to change if you want to be respected can now tell themselves, "I will grow, but not by erasing who I am." Imagine if that day Amara had simply stayed silent and moved on. No phone call, no tours canceled, no reaction from the community. That video might have gone unnoticed, and her story would have faded like so many nameless others. But she didn't choose that kind of silence. She chose to respond with dignity, not to retaliate, but to reset the boundary of what is acceptable in our society. Amara's story is not a tale of clever revenge. It's a gentle but firm reminder. Respect should not be a reward. It should be a given. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated decently. No one should be mocked for carrying the melody of their homeland in their voice. And no one, regardless of status, background, or accent, should be made to feel like they're less than just because they don't sound like you. If you're watching this video, chances are you've been an Amara in your own story. Maybe someone cut you off mid-sentence because you're hard to understand. Maybe someone chuckled when you mispronounced an English word. Maybe you were underestimated in a meeting simply because you weren't as fluent or smooth as others. And if you've experienced that, you are not alone. This story is for you. It is a declaration that your voice deserves to be heard without needing to be perfect. Don't judge someone by the way they speak. Listen to what they're trying to say, because sometimes within those unfamiliar sounds live the most extraordinary souls. Amara never commented on the incident, but she didn't need to, because every action she took, every decision she made, left an impact louder than any statement could. And you watching this are now part of that legacy, not just as a viewer, but as someone who can carry it forward. So if one day you witness someone being mocked for their voice, for their difference, for something they cannot control, don't look away. Don't stay silent. Stand up, not necessarily with words, but by the choices you make. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If it resonated with you, share it with someone you know needs to hear this. And if you've ever been the main character in a story like this, tell it in the comments. Because who knows, your story may become someone else's voice. And when that happens, you'll realize real strength was never in who spoke the loudest, but in who left the longest echo. Thank you for watching to the end. See you in the next story on That Person Was Me.